watching Hockey North, and Karissa, Donkin, I cannot even believe this, but we're a year out to the Olympics, all right? So can we play a game? Let's have some fun.
I love a game. I love a game. Also, where does the time go? Jeez.
I know. So let's make some ridiculously early predictions for this Olympic team, okay? There's a lot that can happen, but again, 1 year away, and my big question is, like, what role does the PWHL actually play in how perhaps this team is formed?
Well, I think one role it could play is, players are competing in a lot more games than we saw them in, obviously, in 2022 when we were in the midst of a pandemic. So I think the possibility for injury is much more of a concern than maybe 4 years ago. But when we're talking about how it actually changes the Canadian roster, Anastasia, I don't think it's going to look significantly different from the last Olympics, even from the last World Championship. So where we're really going to see that, I think, is probably in 5 years' time when we start to look at 2030. But for right now, I think this roster is going to have a lot of familiar names on it.
I agree. Let's take a look at perhaps the locks that we've all agreed upon, all right? This is our producer's board. A lot of familiar names. Karissa, walk me through it. How are you feeling about these locks?
One name that I would add to that, Anastasia, that's not on the list is Danielle Serdachny. And I would put her on that list because I really think she's going to be part of Team Canada's future. She's going to be such a big part of this team going forward, 2030 and beyond. And I think she already has that poise. So she hasn't been to an Olympics yet, but she's shown that she can show up and like I said, be poised in those big tournaments. We look at the World Championship last year. She's out there in overtime, which shows Troy Ryan trusts her. She scores the game-winning goal. Before that, at the Rivalry Series in 2023, she goes out there to take a shot. She looks off Poulet, scores the goal herself. That takes guts, and I think she's got it. So she's someone I would add to that locks list.
Let's take a look at your list, though. Okay, Serdachny's on there. I'm seeing Gardner and Larocque. Walk me through it.
So Jennifer Gardner is somebody who has had a fantastic rookie season with Montreal. We know that she can play alongside Poulin. And I was actually talking to Poulin about her yesterday, and she said just since she's come in November, her game has matured so much. She's so fast. She's got a great shot. And you can just tell she loves being there. She loves the game of hockey, and that kind of radiates around her. And I think that would fit in well to the culture that they've built on this team. And I think she's someone who can also play up and down the lineup. So she could play a bottom six role as well as a top six role. She's got familiarity with Laura Stacey, with Kristen O'Neill as well. So that's why I would put her on there. And when we talk about Jocelyn Larocque, I know a lot of people have talked about, her age going into the next Olympics. And she's obviously been a mainstay on this team for so long, has so much respect from her teammates. And I think, just having somebody like her on the team going into an Olympics, I think she just adds confidence to the team, even if she comes in as your seventh defender. I mean, obviously we know she can play at the top of the lineup with Renata Fast, but even if she gets pushed down the depth chart in the next year, I think she's valuable. And what I would say to that is when I asked Marie-Philippe Poulin a year or so ago, who's the most underrated player who you think is going to be in the PWHL, she said Jocelyn Larocque. And the reason why she said it is because she said she's someone who plays for the logo on her chest every single day. She's a great teammate. And I think that's a little bit irreplaceable. So that's why I've got her on my roster.
And Watt's on the first line.
Yeah, I think, I did struggle with that one because I think that she needs a top six role. I don't think she maybe works as well in the bottom six as somebody like a Julia Gosling. And we know, having been to a world championship last year, she can play that role really well. So I sort of struggled with that, but ultimately I think it would be kind of fun. Like, that line is scary to me. A top line with Watts, Poulin, and Fillier, they can do a lot of damage, in my opinion.
Yeah. Okay, this is fun because I've gone a little bit more traditional, perhaps. Jenner on that first line, I can debate this all day long, but I think all these athletes really deserve a shot, of course, at making this team. Jocelyn Larocque, I mean, her name should be on there. What a leader. But I think that you're right. Like, the question is, if age and experience versus what perhaps the PWHL will do to the age of the top players in the world, I think. I think people are just going to keep getting younger. I think they're going to keep getting faster and stronger. And this has really forced me to think, what is this team going to look like in 2030? So, I mean, there's just an embarrassment of riches, especially, I mean, let me ask you, where do you think is the hardest position to figure out?
I think it's got to be on the back end, Anastasia. I mean, there have been like 11 or 12 different defenders who we've seen called up with Team Canada in the last couple of years. We've seen Claire Thompson come back into the mix, which I think has really shaken things up. She's got to be on this team. She's had a great season so far. I don't think you can move anybody in that top four. Those four are all locks, in my opinion. And then we've also seen Micah Zandyhart. She had a really tough season last year coming off of off-season surgery. And I think she's had a really good start to her season and has earned her way back into the mix. And then when we talk about youth, you know, there's somebody like Sophie Jakes who played a huge role in Minnesota winning the Walter Cup last year. She's earned an invite to the rivalry series. And then of course there's Chloe Primorano, who I think is going to be the defender of the future and already, you know, I think good enough to play on this team. So I don't envy Gina Kingsbury and Troy Ryan and the rest of the coaching staff to make these decisions, but it's a good problem to have.
If you're a betting woman, will Primorano be on that chartered flight headed to Italy in a year's time?
Yeah, I think so. I'd push all my chips in the middle of the table on that one. Anastasia, and I think it's just like she's already good enough to play on this team. She's holding her own in college. Like age aside, I mean, we saw Marie-Philippe Poulin do it years ago. So there is precedent for this, and nobody knows what that's like to go to the Olympics as a teenager. Than Marie-Philippe Poulin. And talking to her yesterday about Chloe Primorano, she said her game is already so mature. And, you know, she's somebody who doesn't take wearing the Canadian jersey for granted. Like she's not someone who, you know, assumes that she's going to be on these teams. She's working really hard for it. And she's grown a lot as a leader in the last year as well, from talking to Vicky Sonohara, who was her coach at the under 18s. And of course, Primorano captained that team to a gold medal. So I think she's got to be there. And, you know, just looking ahead to 2030, she's going to be such a big part of your team. Maybe you take her and, you know, maybe she ends up being your seventh defender, but just to be there, to be in Italy, to see what an Olympics is like, I feel like that's valuable. You would know that better than anybody, obviously.
Well, I don't know more than Gina Kingsbury or Troy Ryan, but I can say that nothing prepares you for an Olympics other than an Olympics. So she's 18, you know, incredibly bright future. She is a star. She will continue to grow into being a star. You can play a million World Championship games or rivalry series. It is not the same as the Olympic stage. So if she's going to be a star for multiple games, I think she has to be on that plane. Like that's just my hot take. You know, talking about philosophy though, youth versus experience. What do you do? I don't know more than Gina Kingsbury or Troy Ryan, but what would you do with that philosophy?
And to be clear, I don't either. You know, we're putting on our pulling at our magic 8 balls and putting on our prognosticators hats here. But I mean, talking to Gina last year before the World Championship, like it's no secret that the Canadian roster looks different than the American roster. They've taken a much different philosophy. Their team is quite young. And you know, you can debate over which is the better approach to take. I mean, the Canadians are coming off of a world championship, so obviously they're doing something right. And the explanation that Gina gave me about that is, you know, a lot of people would like them to be integrating youth a little bit faster than they have, but they're very careful about when they bring someone up and how they do it. And part of that is because they've worked really hard to build a culture with a lot of these veteran players, with the people like Marie-Philippe Poulin, Brienne Jenner, Sarah Nurse, Natalie Spooner, Jocelyn Larocque, all of those folks. And so you don't really want to mess with that, right? And so obviously there are different names, younger players who are going to be at this Olympics who were not at the last Olympics, but the core of this team I don't think is going to change, and that's because they feel like they have a core of players who know how to win, and they don't want to mess with that. You can't really blame them.
No, I totally agree. I think 2026 is going to be a little bit more traditional of a roster, but 2030, this like fun little back and forth. I don't think that the 2030 Olympic roster will be almost recognizable. Like I think that the PWHL is again just going to continue to introduce us to new stars that are young, like folks that are born in 2007 young, you know what I mean? So it's yeah, it's really exciting to see what the PW is doing. And hey, we're on international break right now, but CBC's got you covered, Karissa. February 15th, Sarah Fillier and the Sirens are heading to Montreal. It's gonna be fun.